Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special Pharos Lecture and Conversation with Dr. Shaun Maguire. I'm Dr. Patrick Nash, the founding director of Pharos, and I'm delighted to see so many of you in here tonight. We're very grateful to our friends at Oriel College for hosting us at such short notice, and rather less grateful to those elsewhere who would have rather that tonight's lecture hadn't happened at all. Now, the Pharos Foundation was founded on the premise that Western society will never escape the culture wars if we cannot produce serious culture at scale. It's all very well to talk about free speech in the abstract, but freedoms and principles mean little if they are not embodied in non-partisan institutions with the will and daring to act on them. Our basic ethos, then, is to move fast and build things. Accordingly, Pharos has begun funding the very best non-ideological research projects at postdoctoral level across the arts, and we're building a world-class program of public education to bring lectures, courses, and conversations from Oxford to anyone, anywhere, with a love for ideas and the fortitude to have their own assumptions challenged by some of the world's best minds. Our speaker this evening is one of those minds, and he needs little by way of introduction. Dr. Shaun Maguire holds a master's degree in statistics and a PhD in physics from Caltech, and he is a partner at Sequoia Capital, one of the world's oldest and most successful venture capital firms. At Sequoia, Shaun led their investments into SpaceX, X, The Boring Company, Foundry, and many others. Prior to Sequoia, Shaun co-founded a cybersecurity company called Expanse, which was acquired by Palo Alto Networks. He was a partner at Google Ventures, and he worked at DARPA. He deployed to Afghanistan in support of DARPA's mission there, and he's visited over 100 countries. It's an honor for Pharos and a pleasure for me to host Shaun tonight, who has flown in especially. His talk is titled Refounding Democracy, Free Speech and Information Warfare, and there will be an opportunity afterwards for you all to ask questions. So please join me in welcoming Shaun to the stage. And Shaun, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Truly, I've never done anything like this. For most of my life, I've lived in the shadows, was very quiet. October 7th lit something inside of me, and I've been much more public. And so I'm not used to being here in front of so many smart people, and it feels a little awkward. I'm kind of used to be sitting with you all. It's amazing to me that we're living at a time where it's more politically correct to be an arms dealer than to be a truth slinger on Twitter or on X. It's truly wild, but when the speech was canceled, I said I have to fly to Oxford and find a way to do something even bigger. So thank you to the Pharos Foundation for setting this up. I'm going to talk a lot about information warfare and free speech. I'm going to share a bunch of stories that I've never told anyone. You know, I used to work in the US government, and I've seen a lot of things that I've never talked about that were very foundational in terms of giving me context to be able to piece together what is happening in the world today. But before I start my talk, I just want to give two preambles. One is just in the backdrop of having a speech canceled, it reminds me of something very powerful that I was told by one of my mentors. There's a man named Professor Richard Muller. He's a retired physics professor from UC Berkeley. Berkeley is, historically used to be one of the bastions of free speech and one of the most liberal campuses in America. Rich is a very eminent physicist. He started 2 experiments that won Nobel Prizes, discovered the accelerated and expansion of the universe and the anisotropy of the cosmic microwave background. Like, Rich is a heavy, heavy hitter. And I was lucky I wrote 1 paper with Rich. But he gave me this anecdote 10 years ago. So roughly 10 years ago, there was a speaker, Milo Yiannopoulos. He's a very far-right pundit in America, primarily, that was supposed to give a speech at Berkeley, and the students protested it, and the speech ended up getting canceled. The administration caved, and it got canceled. that was really one of the kind of beginnings of this cancel culture movement, especially in university settings. And so Rich, being a professor at Berkeley for call it 40 years, 30 to 40 years before that, at the time he told me he was very frustrated. And he said, back in my day, in the 70s, when there was a controversial speaker, we would let them come. We would sit very quietly and patiently, let them finish, get every word out that they wanted to say. And then at the end of the speech, we would make a sport out of trying to embarrass them, trying to ask such pointed questions that you can trap them in their fallacious logic. And that's the right way to move society and to shape ideas, not silencing people from even coming to speak at all. And so we really have to get back to the spirit of debate. And the second preamble it's about empathy. I am a proud Zionist. My wife's family is from Israel. I'm a Jew. There's only one Jewish nation in the world. The definition of Zionism to me is to have a belief that Israel has a right to exist and a right to have self-determination. That said, I also have huge empathy for Muslims, and something that is oftentimes lost in the nuance of Twitter. I've been to 100 countries. I've embedded myself in the Middle East. I was born with a gift of not having a Jewish-sounding name, which let me actually go travel places that other Jews cannot go. Like, Jews are banned from going to many Muslim countries. When I first went to Syria, they kept me at the border for 5 hours, just asking me repeatedly, are you Jewish? Have you ever been to Israel? Do you know any Jews? 5 hours. They took me off a bus and asked only me. And I had no Israel stamp or anything. But I've embedded myself in the Middle East. I've been to at least 20 Middle Eastern countries, really trying to learn from the people, see other cultures, see other perspectives, and just for anything that comes across on Twitter, obviously I have empathy for any peace-seeking human or anyone that has good intentions in their heart. I do not have any sympathy for Hamas, but I have incredible sympathy for any innocent civilian, and that's oftentimes not clear, and I wanted to say that explicitly. Okay, so now on to information warfare. Information warfare has a very long history. I'm really going to be talking about in the modern era, in the internet era, which is the era in which I've been an information warfare soldier. This is something that's not very public about me, but I've basically been fighting information wars professionally for at least 15 years, and informally for almost at least a decade before that. I was trained as a physicist, and the way of thinking, there's a lot of powerful tools that you're taught to think as a physicist, one of which is to break complicated problems into very, very simple pieces and try to master those simple pieces. You think about a ball on a string and the physics of just the ball on the string, and maybe you think about it in one dimension, like it can only move back and forth. And then maybe you attach a mass to the ball. So now you think about a spring and a mass. And then you maybe have two springs and a mass. And it turns out the physics of like a blade of grass moving in the wind is very similar to a few springs and masses put together. But when you master these simple systems, it gives you intuition to kind of move to much more complicated systems. And so one of the things that I think has been powerful for me is I was born in 1985. I grew up as the first generation of online kids, and I've seen information warfare evolve. And so I've gotten to see it in the very simple stages when you could actually reverse engineer exactly what was happening, and I've kind of seen it go all the way. So I want to start with just some progressively more and more complicated examples of information warfare and how it's developed. And one of the things I'm going to be working towards that we'll talk about kind of towards the end of the talk is the Al-Aqli Hospital bombing and the way that the media ran with the story. So if you remember in the very early innings of the current war in Gaza, on October 17th, there was a hospital explosion, or at least alleged hospital explosion. In less than 2 hours of the explosion, the New York Times had a headline that said, "Israeli airstrike hits Gaza hospital. killing 500, Palestinian Health Ministry says. None of that is true. There were civilians killed, and that is tragic, but it was way less than 500, and it wasn't from Israel. It was a misfired rocket from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and that is all basically fact at this point. I was the first person in the world to question that headline. I questioned it within 2 minutes of it getting posted on the New York Times. And the reason why I was able to do that is because I had 20 years of kind of exposure to information warfare, and I was able to build up to it. And so that's kind of where we're going to get to towards the end of this. I'll break it down for you. So just to give you a rough outline of the information warfare side, and free speech has been a core part of the information warfare battle, I'd say really starting around 2020, always, but especially starting around 2020. So kind of rough timeline, I'm going to break it into 5 eras. There is the prehistory era. I'm not going to talk about it very much. That's early days of the internet, early days of hacking, phreaking, things like that. The next era has been controlling the content. This is 2016 election and Russian fake news farms and before that, but it's controlling the content. The next phase has been controlling the platforms. So silencing the platforms, determining what can be said, banning accounts, things like that. The current era is controlling the algorithm. This is the TikTok era. It's much more powerful than just controlling the content or controlling the platform. And I'm going to break all these things down in much more detail. And then there's the future. And it's hard to say exactly what the future has in store. The only thing that I think is very clearly coming immediately or very soon, probably in this US election cycle, will be AI content. And we haven't really seen it at scale. I think we'll probably see it before the November election. So anyways, that's just like a rough outline of how I think about these phases, and I'm going to kind of go through each of these. But I'm going to start with some very simple stories just to give some intuition for how information warfare can play out. The first couple are stupid personal anecdotes, but I promise you some of these are going to get pretty crazy. So my first real exposure as an information warfare practitioner came in 4th grade when I was about 10 years old in America. One of my friends, we didn't have the internet at my house yet, but one of my friends had the internet. In America, there's this thing called America Online. That was the most popular internet service provider. This was a year before they came out with AOL Instant Messenger, but they had chat rooms. So my friend and I, we would go in these chat rooms and we would pretend that we were a professional athlete. And we were 10 years old. And when we first started doing this, people thought we were lying or whatever. But we got good enough at it. We figured out what to say to where you could actually convince people that we were that person. And people would say, so if we pretend we were this guy named Mike Piazza. He was the catcher for the Dodgers. This is England. Most of you probably don't know anything about baseball, but let's just say he was a very famous baseball player at the time. And we went and found everything in his life history, like his family, his whole life. And basically everyone would always ask, Mike Piazza, you're a professional baseball player, you have lots of money, why are you in an AOL chat room? And this is 1996. And so people just were not used to this. And it basically, if you came out initially and said you're Mike Piazza, they wouldn't believe you. But if you just talk to people, for like 30, 45 minutes, and then they ask what you do or who, you say, oh, I'm a baseball player, and they say, oh, what do you mean you're a baseball player? Oh, I've been playing baseball my whole life. They're like, do you make money in baseball? Yeah, I make money. Like, are you a professional baseball player? Yeah, I'm a professional baseball player. Who are you? I'm Mike Piazza. And then they would be like, there's no way you're Mike Piazza. Mike Piazza would never be in an AOL chat room. And then you say, it's really hard for me to meet people in real life because they all recognize me and they want something from me, and so I just, I like to come in here and just talk to people and talk to normal people where no one knows who I am. And I'm not joking. It went from no one would believe us to, with this script, we could get 90% of people to believe that we were actually Mike Piazza. And they would ask us like, tell us a dirty secret about your life, and we tell them, something from childhood or whatever. And we were 10 years old, and we were able to convince adults that we were Mike Piazza. So anyways, that was my first exposure. Kind of next thing, in the late 90s, call it 99, one of my friends and I, we used to make lots of fake websites, like lots of fake websites. It's hard to explain how easy it was to make fake websites at the time. Websites would they would have their source code. You could just view in browser the HTML for the websites, and basically everything was just HTML. We wouldn't clone Flash websites. And you could basically just copy it, and now you had a duplicate of their web page, and you just host it on a server. And so we would, make a fake Yahoo or whatever, and with a 0 instead of an O, and then we would see what people were searching, and you could ask people to put in their credit card information, and people would always put in their credit card information. I never once used anyone's credit card. It was more just to see that we could do it, and it was trivial. It was literally trivial to convince people to do this. And you go in one of these AOL chat rooms, and you just type in like, hey, check out yahoo.com with an O. Anyways, that was kind of my second big exposure to early information warfare. Jumping much further forward to 2009, I was on a really crazy around the world trip. I was living on about $10 a day, backpacking around the world, genuinely just trying to understand how the world works. Like, that was my motivation for the trip. I didn't party at all on the trip. I hitchhiked all over the world. Like, stayed in people's houses, stayed in hostels. It was a pretty crazy trip. And one of the just kind of world-shattering experiences for me was in China. So this is end of March or early April 2009. This is the year after the Olympics. And I took the train, and whenever I was in these countries, both because I had no money, but also out of curiosity, I always traveled in like the cheapest, poorest form of transport. So in China at the time, it was third-class rail, where you're really with like the Han, kind of the men, like the workers. There would there'd be chickens in the rail car, and you sleep in these little rooms with 3 levels of bunks, and 6 people in a room. And so I took the train from Beijing to Urumqi, in Xinjiang in the far west. It was like a 2-day train ride or something like that, where you're in this one kind of rail cabin, which had 50, 60 people or something in one cabin. And about 2/3 of the rail car were young Han men that were moving to Xinjiang to become police officers. China had a program at the time where they were paying young Han men, I don't remember the exact amount, I think it was about $20,000 equivalent as a bonus to move to Xinjiang, and they'd pay you about $25,000 a year in salary in the time to go be a police officer in Xinjiang. And when you're on a bus for 2 days and 2/3 of the people are going to be police officers in Xinjiang, it's just like, what's going on here? There's clearly something happening. And 2 months later is when the real riots started in Xinjiang, which led to the extreme crackdowns by China and basically putting Uyghurs in internment camps. And the catalyst there that really started the riots is in some Mandarin forum, there was an allegation from a Han person that a Han woman had been raped by Uyghurs. And that led to conflict, which led to riots, which led to crackdowns, which led to having an excuse to put any of the Uyghurs that were fighting back in jail. And I saw it all happen. Like, I literally saw the planning, the foresight that goes into spending a couple of years incentivizing people to go be police officers, and then starting a riot, and then using that as an excuse to put people in jail. And the same thing happened in Tibet. It happened a few years earlier in Tibet, but this is a playbook that China was using at the time. And it was very, very powerful to see that conspiracy theories aren't always crazy. Like it was, I lived it, I saw it. And the takeaway from this particular anecdote is just that nations, especially America, have foresight and they have planning. And these sometimes what you see on the surface is not everything. There's a lot underneath it all. And that you can have things like, a post in a forum that was probably, CCP agent, and it catalyzed the whole thing, but all the dominoes have been put in place. Okay. And I guess one other thing from this story, and I ended up working in China that summer, and this is a very interesting time in China. It was a very optimistic time. The economy was ripping. There was a goal that China would westernize, or a belief that it would westernize as the economy matures, which is not exactly what happened. But something that was very obvious even then was that the CCP had 3 really primary goals of how to control people, which was 1, financial control, and that was through the social credit score system getting rolled out around then. Next is they really wanted to control internet infrastructure, and this is Huawei. If you control the actual physical fiber pipes, then you have control over information. And then the third is controlling content. And you would see it, TV would get blacked out. If you were watching foreign news or whatever, they would just block out CNN for 15, 20 minutes every day or so whenever it was a story they didn't want to be reported on. And you would just see it with the level of information control. And so just that experience of being there when China wasn't quite as good as they are now at all this control was very powerful for me. Next story related to China from shortly after there, this is a crazy one. In late 2012, I think in October 2012, there was a New York Times journalist, a guy named David Barbosa, who had a kind of earth-shattering story for the time. He was the New York Times station chief who ran the Shanghai bureau for a decade. And he reported that the Prime Minister of China, Wen Jiabao, that his family had become multi-billionaires while he was in office, especially through his mother and wife. And this was not known, and CCP had such good control of information that it was shocking, and they didn't want that to be known because, communist roots, making billions of dollars and doing it through kind of obfuscated ways. So when David broke the story, it was kind of earth-shattering news, especially for me. It had just been in China significantly and was still paying very close attention to the country. So that happened. At the time, I had just finished working on really advanced cybersecurity and information warfare inside the US government at DARPA. And about 2 months later, I was in China for a physics conference, QIP, Quantum Information Processing, which was in January 2013. I was running on the treadmill one morning, and they did not just a 15-minute blackout, an hour blackout of CNN. And it was okay, what is happening? I got on a VPN, and basically New York Times ran another story about this. And about 2 weeks later, it came out that China launched, which to me at the time was one of the largest scale cyber attacks in history. I think it's still one of the best resource cyber attacks in history. So basically, they spent about 4 months or 3 months after the Barbosa story. They had about 1,000 operatives, literally 1,000 hackers that all worked in one building, and they spent 3+ months just trying to hack New York Times employees. And they ended up hacking over 50 New York Times employees. And they didn't even do anything with it. They just did it to show that they could. And the level of work that went into this was really extreme. They were doing things like they'd figure out on social networks who for any New York Times article or in birth records or whatever, who are your relatives, who's your grandma, send phishing emails to all these people, and then if you get someone's grandma, then you look at all the email history between the grandma and the journalist, and you make an email, because it's much easier to hack older people, I'm sorry, but so you hack the grandma, and then you basically look at all the email history between the two, and anything that has an attachment, like maybe the grandma would send a electronic holiday card every year. And so you basically wait for the birthday or something when she sends that, and you send a hacked version of, like a malicious version of the card from the actual grandma's account. And almost always when you have that level of sophistication, you can hack anyone. And so that happened, and I was still kind of in the government circle at that point, and so I saw some of the US side of trying to unfurl this whole thing as it was happening. And just, again, that level of scale of New York Times writes an article and it kicks off 1,000 people spending 3 months just trying to hack the New York Times, and they don't even do anything with it other than try to intimidate the New York Times. They simply wanted to make it so that New York Times was afraid to write stories like that. And there's another thing that's going to come up later, these intimidation tactics. Okay. And for what it's worth, Dave Barboza is now a Sequoia-backed founder. I work with him. It's kind of crazy how, and he's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, and it's kind of crazy how that goes. I glossed over this, but 2010 to 2012, I was working in the US government on these really, really advanced programs inside what's called DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. We were doing everything from like early days of trying to understand how information flows on social networks, to advanced cyber work, to applying machine learning in the war in Afghanistan, all sorts of things. And we did crazy work. Probably the thing I'm most proud of in my life is the work we did there, but can't talk about most of it. But I'll just say, gave me quite a lens through which to view what's happened since. And I'll just put a placeholder for someone that's going to come up later. DARPA is most of you might not know DARPA. DARPA is about a $3 billion, or at least when I was there, is about a $3 billion a year research arm of the US government, Department of Defense. It's very small. There's only maybe 80 people in the building at any given time that are doing like research or doing advanced projects. And usually you're what's called a program manager. You're kind of running programs. DARPA created the internet, like actually created the internet. DARPA created GPS. DARPA created stealth technology. Played a huge role in mRNA vaccines in more recent times. Was a huge part of having self-driving cars. It can give you on and on. The technological impact of DARPA is unbelievable. But when I was there, I was in a program office called Information Innovation Office. There were maybe only 12, 13 people in our office that would sit together. And one of the guys is a man named Mudge. That's his hacker name. Mudge is one of the most famous hackers of all time. In the 90s, he testified to the US Senate that they could turn off the internet with like a few lines of code. He started this hacker collective in Boston called The Loft. They were very, very elite guys. And I worked directly with Mudge. We talked together every day. He was a mentor of mine. He really taught me how to view the world. We would go walk around outside in Virginia, and he would just point out what all the different sensors on every building was. And and it wasn't just outside with physical infrastructure, also from an information perspective. And I just want to say I'm very, and Mudge is going to come up because he was a whistleblower at Twitter in 2020. But I'm very lucky to have had mentorship from literally the best in the world. And so kind of last thing I'll say on this is, for me, it's been very funny since October 7th, where I come across as a VC and it's this dumb VC. What does he possibly know about the world? What does he possibly know about information warfare? Man, if you guys knew what I've done in my life, I just, and so anyways, just saying some of these things to get a little bit of credibility. All right, so going back to this different phases of information warfare, the first phase that I mentioned was controlling the content. And I don't think it was that interesting, to be honest, until the 2016 US election. And I'm going to talk a lot about the US elections because, and I'm sorry, I know it's a very international room, and I don't, America's not just the center of the universe. There's a big world out there. I'm not one of these, anyways, I won't finish that sentence. But American elections are very high stakes, and so it's oftentimes where the state-of-the-art new information warfare tactics come out. You save them for that election cycle to try to have a big impact. And 2008, Obama was basically the first at least US candidate to use social media. He was very effective. It was a big part of why he won the election. 2012, kind of nothing that notable happened. But 2016 is where things started to get interesting. And so I'll walk you through some examples. But they're going to get a lot more interesting in 2020 and 2024. So let me just caveat that. 2016 was the era of fake content. You may remember all these stories about Russian fake news bot farms. That was obviously a huge deal, and it was very real. Another one was this was the beginning of using large-scale botnets. So you'd have fake users on these social platforms, so you could give content lots of likes or lots of boosts or lots of replies to make it seem like it's legitimate content that people should take seriously and give it credibility. Try to influence people through that. If you see that, 100 times more people support Hillary than Trump, then that's significant. If you see 100x more people support bananas than oranges, then go bananas. Anyways, those were two big things. But I think one of the more sophisticated things that happened in 2016 was the Hillary Clinton email server hack, which kind of, now that we have the retrospective on it, Hillary Clinton, kind of against the advice of government, was running her own email server, and the Russians hacked it. They did something smart. Something that is going to come up a lot is what I'd call credibility laundering. The Russian government, if they send hacked emails from Hillary to Julian Assange, they don't have much credibility. But the Russian government basically set up a fake hacker collective that they called Guccifer 2.0. And it was kind of in the spirit of Anonymous, which had been very successful and is almost described as like a rebirth of Anonymous. And so they convinced WikiLeaks that they were legitimate, which the documents were legitimate. And they very strategically they dripped out damaging Hillary emails kind of over the 6 months before the election. And they did it in a very controlled, smart way, saving some of the kind of most damaging, controversial things for just a few weeks before the election, which is a time where you don't really have enough time to go reposition the narrative after that. For what it's worth, to me, I think that in the 2016 election, Hillary, she got hurt more by foreign actors than Trump in that one. In 2020, Trump was the one that got hurt more, and I'll get there in a second. But anyways, 2016, this is the beginning of fake content. It wasn't that sophisticated in hindsight, but it was significant. 2020, this was the era of controlling the platforms. What does that mean? It means outright banning topics. In 2020, you were not allowed to talk about COVID origins. You were not allowed to talk about the Hunter Biden laptop. And when I say you weren't allowed to talk about it, if you tried to paste a link from, the New York Post is who broke the original story about the Hunter Biden laptop. If you tried to paste a link from the New York Post on that story, you couldn't post on Facebook or Twitter with that link. It just would not let you post. You were completely censored on these topics. And if you now, with the retrospective, especially thank you, Elon, and the Twitter files, and candidly, just today, Mike Benz, who if you don't follow, Mike Benz is an expert in information warfare as well. He had a couple amazing tweets today with some of the more recent level of, candidly, US government involvement in censoring these topics or banning these topics. But I would say in this era is controlling the platform. So that was fully banning topics. It was also banning accounts. And we saw a lot of that. I'm going to tell you another story of information warfare from the 2020 election. And this is of a different varietal. This is controlling the timing of information and the impact you can have there. Whatever you think of COVID vaccines, with hindsight, people have different opinions or whatever, but this is a kind of another crazy story. I don't want to burn this relationship. I don't want to fully out this person, but I have a lot of friends both in Department of Defense that were working on logistics to distribute the vaccines, and I have a lot of friends at Pfizer that were doing research and things on the science side. And I was told by one of my friends 6 weeks before the US election that Pfizer had just finished phase 3 clinical trials. The drug had 90+% efficacy against COVID, and that there was going to be an emergency FDA meeting in 4 weeks to approve the drug, and then it would be announced immediately right before the election, and we would have the good news. And then they were going to start, they were already putting in place all the kind of, especially US DoD was handling the logistics for distributing the vaccine. So I was told that by a bulletproof source. I actually told all my partners at Sequoia that was happening because it's important information as we're making decisions around portfolios. And something really crazy happened, which is when that kind of emergency meeting of the FDA happened, they actually passed a new rule that whenever a new drug is approved, that you have to wait 8 weeks before you can announce it. It's like a cooling off period in case you learn anything bad after. So the COVID vaccine ended up getting announced 6 days after the US presidential election. Just think about that for a second. Think about that timing. Trump, in one of the presidential debates, I think it was the second one, he was asked about COVID, and he said there's a vaccine coming. It's right around the corner. It's right around the corner. And he said it like that in this very confident way. I never talk to him, so I don't know exactly what he knew, but I think he probably had the same information I had. And that night, I was pretty blown away. Like CNN was mocking him like crazy. Like, this guy's delusional. It's another Trump lie. We have no sense of when a vaccine's going to come, et cetera. And it was crazy. So I was like, well, they're about to be surprised next week. It's going to be announced. And then they wait until the week after the election. So just think about that. Sit on that. This is happening on every topic, all day, every day, 24/7. Kind of going back to Twitter, now X, this friend mentor, Mudge, had joined Twitter as their head of cybersecurity. I made that intro to get him the job. Mudge is a true patriot, and he had a lot of job offers, and the reason why he chose Twitter was he wanted to protect it. He viewed it as unbelievably important platform for democracy. That was literally why he joined. And I'm not going to give the full story because I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but Mudge ended up being a whistleblower. He was running cybersecurity at Twitter, and he ended up testifying to US Congress. He had an 80 or so page report, which said that he discovered there were multiple spies, foreign spies inside Twitter. He reported it to the CEO. CEO did nothing. That there, were problems with the algorithm. They were censoring speech. This is someone I know unbelievably well who's a true patriot. Like, this guy who's not even very political. And he went and reported all this, testified, and nothing happened. Why did nothing happen? Well, I think, you got to go into the Twitter files. Like, the US government had incredible access to Twitter and had deep flow of talent with the FBI and other agencies, and they had, I think, really extreme impact over what was happening there. And it wasn't just Twitter, it's most of these platforms. And so, and it's not just the American government, like it's all governments. You heard my China stories earlier, like, wait till we get to 2024. And I would just say, like, if I'm trying to be fair, I think that in 2016, all this, like the disinformation and foreign intervention definitely hurt Hillary on balance. And in 2020, I think that it hurt Trump on balance in the election. 2024, this is when things have gotten insane. Like, really, things are crazier than people realize. This is the era of controlling the algorithm, and a lot more than just that. And I think it's really clear now with some of the TikTok algorithm analytics that have been happening the last 4 or 5 months, of which I know the people running all those analytics, the TikTok algorithm is just unbelievably biased. Like it's designed to create dissent in the West. It's designed to create chaos. It's designed to make people hate each other. Even like, you can say that things are designed to just amplify the popular view, but in Israel, at least 2 or 3 months ago, last time I saw this specific analytics, and TikTok has been making it harder to get the analytics. Even in Israel, about 70% of the content that was being displayed was pro-Hamas, like pro-Palestine, inside Israel. So it makes sense in America, it makes sense in Europe, but the algorithm is broken. The algorithm is nefarious if inside Israel it's displaying pro-Palestinian content. And so anyways, I'm not going to go into too much more detail on TikTok. Obviously, there's been huge things happening in the US government on this. And for what it's worth, it's nuanced. Like Elon has brought up some great points that the legislation that's been proposed has backdoors where you can use it to ban not just TikTok. You could use it to ban other social media platforms. And I think that's very dangerous. I think that one of the absolute top things we need to be fighting for right now is for free speech. It is like, without free speech, you do not have democracy. So anyways, that is my first anecdote from 2024. Next up, I told you the story about taking the trains in China in 2009. It's not just sleeper police, it's sleeper institutions. It's hard to explain the level of foresight that goes into some of these government projects. And so to give you a couple examples, like when you look at Al Jazeera America or Al Jazeera English, this is a news platform put out by Qatar. I've been following it obsessively since they launched in English because of my Middle Eastern travels. And it's been pretty shocking. Like, it is the most factual news you can possibly find on almost every topic. But when it's Israel related or when it's Kashmir or any kind of pro-Islam topic, it becomes unbelievably biased. They build up credibility by always telling the truth on things that don't matter to them. But then they lie when it does matter. And it's very hard for people, if you're not a deep, deep expert in this individual topic, to be able to tell the difference. And so they build up this credibility and then they leverage it in this other place. Russia Today is a very similar playbook of like great, very factual news on most topics if they're low stakes, but then if it's Russia related, it's total propaganda. Unfortunately, Human Rights Watch is the same. Human Rights Watch is great for most topics around the world, but when it comes to Israel, Palestine, it's complete garbage. It goes beyond just these sleeper institutions. There's something even more extreme. There's kind of like information bias. If you go look at Wikipedia 15 years ago or so was very balanced, right, left. Wikipedia in the last 5 years or so has become extremely left-leaning. And there's many topics, like, when, as an example, when Jack Smith got appointed the special investigator to prosecute Trump in one of these crimes, Jack Smith had this incredibly horrific failure in his judicial life, where he had been the person that had prosecuted the governor of Virginia on a bribery charge, and he actually got him convicted. The governor of Virginia, turns out that Jack Smith, when he had kind of read the definition of bribery to the jury, he fibbed on the definition. He didn't tell them the true definition. And so this conviction got unanimously overturned by the US Supreme Court. It was an 8-0 overturning because one of the justices was out. That's pretty rare to have a unanimous decision on a partisan topic like that. And this guy, when he got appointed special investigator, you couldn't add to Wikipedia that he had had that loss, They did not want it to be on there. And it may be on there now, but for at least like when it's in the news cycle, for that first 2 weeks or so, it was not there. And there was an editing battle happening, and I was watching it. And it's just, these are small things, but they have a huge, huge impact. Jack Smith gets appointed special prosecutor, and so you go, who's Jack Smith? You look on Wikipedia, and there's none of this ultra important history that he had previously lied when getting a Republican governor convicted of a crime and had it unanimously overturned by the Supreme Court. This is the level of subtlety to information warfare these days. I'm almost done. Kind of the last two topics I'm going to get to, and then just some closing remarks. I want to talk about what's happening on US university campuses right now with these college encampments. Just given my past life, I've been trying to study these things. Like in the last week, I've been to 3 different encampments. I've been to the encampment at UCLA 4 times in 1 week. I've been to the encampment at Stanford on Monday, and I was at the encampment at George Washington University yesterday. There is absolutely foreign influence in these encampments. There is incredibly sophisticated playbook. And the playbook, it's really, honestly, as a Jew, it's very disheartening. Let me tell you some of the things happening. So one is they're using token Jews as organizers of the encampments, and they're using token Jews to stand watch or to be kind of some of the gatekeepers going in. So like at UCLA, one of the women, like one of the times when I went, she was wearing a kippah. It's incredibly rare for women to wear kippahs. She also had a giant Star of David necklace. And they're instructed not to talk to you, but if they think you're a Zionist. But I got to the point where I asked her where she's from, and I was being really nice. And I asked her if she knows any Jewish prayers. She doesn't know any Jewish prayers. There's not a legitimate Jew in the world that wears a kippah that doesn't know a Jewish prayer. She's a token. She's a scam. At the encampment at USC, they had made this, they were trying to have a Passover Seder, and they wrote the Hebrew backwards. They wrote the Hebrew backwards in the Seder. I swear on my life. The letters, it'd be like writing the English alphabet. If you were trying to say the word the, it'd be like spelling it E-H-T. That is how they celebrated their Seder. They were at these, during the Shabbat, during Passover, a bunch of these encampments were eating challah bread. You don't eat challah bread during Passover. You eat unleavened bread. You eat matzah. There are these cues that most people don't pick up on, but Jews do. So they're using these token Jews to stand guard. They're also using, candidly, real Jews, but who are just in the extreme minority and dressing them up, and they're calling them organizers of these protests. I'm not saying that there aren't, there are many anti-Zionist Jews, but they are certainly minorities, probably 90 to 10%. That's all the point. 90% are pro-Israel, 10% are against. And the 10% that are against, for the most part, not all, there's some incredibly highly educated anti-Israel Jews like Zachary Foster. I will give you credit. You are very well educated and you are an anti-Zionist. But there's this incredible strategy of if you can say that you have a Jewish organizer, so you find the dumb Jew that doesn't actually know anything about their religion, and say that they're an organizer, now it gives the whole movement credibility. Another example, in these Middle Eastern Studies departments, which are primarily funded by Qatar, literally, they have a playbook of they're hiring token Jews to be faculty in these Middle Eastern Studies departments. They're hiring Jews, they're hiring anti-Zionist Jews to be faculty in these departments so that they can claim, oh, we have this Jew on our faculty roster who he doesn't like Israel. They're tiny, tiny minority. One of the only people I was able to get to talk to me at UCLA is an incoming faculty, and he's never been to Israel, which if you're going to be a Jew in the Middle Eastern Studies department at a college, you should probably go visit Israel. He also, I don't want to get into all the nitty gritty, but he doesn't know anything. It was shocking. He doesn't know the history. And the only explanation I had was he got the job because he's so stupid. And it's such a symbolic win. This is happening in many different topics. It's not just this. Like, this is happening across the board. These are just very recent, salient examples. Anyways, Al-Aqli Hospital. What happened there? Because I've been following information warfare and the Israel-Gaza conflict, I was able to see the evolution. After Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, Hamas got elected. Kind of first major attacks started 2007, 2008. Kind of first major Gaza War after the withdrawal. And that's when some of these early ideas started to get pioneered of, using hospitals, using schools to fight out of, to force Israel to go, respond there, which then obviously you'll be able to take pictures of, like them shooting into a school or whatever. But they weren't very good at it yet. It was like very obvious what was happening. But if you saw it then and you've seen the evolution, for me, one other point is with anything in war, it takes time to know the truth. Like with Shireen al-Abku, the Palestinian journalist that was killed very tragically, shot by an Israeli soldier before October 7th, call it a year ago, I don't remember the exact date. That was tragic. When it happened, people were protesting the moment it happened. And I basically told people, I said, we don't know who shot her yet. Wait 2 weeks. Wait until we have some type of evidence. There was fire going in both directions. You just cannot know in real time. In that case, it turned out it was the IDF. They owned it. It's a tragedy, and these things happen. But if you think you know what actually happened in real time during war, you're delusional. And so with Al-Aqli Hospital, the New York Times posted about it less than 2 hours after the explosion happened. It is impossible to know at that point attribution, where the explosion came from, how many casualties there are. They reported an exact number, at least 500 dead. And they said Palestinians say, and the people that control information coming out of Gaza is Hamas. And so it's Hamas says, which is, not a very trustworthy source. So anyways, for me, when I saw that with the history, it was obvious that they couldn't possibly have any confidence in what was in the reality. And so I immediately called them out. And that was actually the fastest that I think we've ever gotten to the truth on one of these things. Since October 7th, there is this kind of major change in information warfare, which now there's this open source intelligence, OSINT, and they've gotten really, really good. They weren't this good 4 or 5 years ago, and the OSINT community did an incredible job on that day of piecing together all the different signals and kind of figuring out what happened. But why did I have such an emotional reaction to that? One of the things that's been weaponized against the Jews in history is called blood libel, where you say, oh, Jews make up a lie that Jews raped this woman, which that one has been used a lot. Or, oh, Jews murdered a baby or kidnapped a baby, or they're sex trafficking or whatever. These things are used because they evoke such powerful human reactions that it gives you top cover to go do whatever you want. And it's a tactic that's just used at an extremely large scale against the Jews. And so with Al-Aqli Hospital, the story that just indiscriminate bombing, killing 500 people, many of which are women and children, that's not actually what's happening. There are many women and children being killed. That is tragic. But if you look at the statistics, there's, as of December, there was 0.6 casualties per bomb drop. So almost 2 bombs per death, meaning that it's extreme precision bombing. If you look at the Gaza Ministry of Health, they say there's about 35,000 dead, but 10,000 of them they don't know. They don't have proof, and so it's somewhere between 25,000 and 35,000 dead. There's at least 10 to 12,000 of those that are soldiers, and so there are certainly civilians being killed. It is horrible. But Hamas is incentivized to use all imagery they possibly can to try to elicit these reactions. And they've used a lot of imagery of dead children in Syria. New York Times has put imagery of dead children from Syria and claimed that it was from Israel. The New York Times has done this and then gotten caught after, and they barely even renounce it. So anyways, coming to the end, where are we now? What comes next? I think I'll just say what's next. One prediction, AI is obviously going to be huge in information warfare. We haven't really seen it yet. I think we're going to see something right before the election. We call these things October surprises in US politics because the elections are the first week of November. I think we're probably going to see some kind of crazy AI exploit 2 weeks before the election that you don't have enough time to really verify and just create some chaos there to try to tilt the scales one way or the other. So that's something to pay attention to. But in general, AI is going to play a big role. Just kind of concluding remarks, there are bad actors in all groups of people. We should never judge groups based on their worst members. Islam is not Hamas. Judaism is not Ben Gvir. But at the same time, we'd be foolish to think that all systems are equal. Democracy is infinitely better than autocracy. Capitalism is better than communism. We're delusional if we haven't learned these lessons. We must return to empathy and discourse. We need to listen to each other. But at the same time, we can't be naive about the proxy wars that are afoot. There's a great power struggle happening right now between East versus West, and these two sides play by different rules. In the West, we just have different standards for truth and values than the East. And we have to keep this in mind as you're absorbing information. Think about what is the motive behind it? Where is it coming from? How much forethought went into trying to shape my view on this topic? That said, I am always a delusionally optimistic person. I think the things we have to do right now are, one, we have to keep building in the West. We can't put our head in the sand, we have to keep building. The best thing we can possibly do is have a strong economy, bring manufacturing back, produce goods that everywhere are needed, whether they're digital goods, whether they're physical goods, whatever they are. And candidly, we have to fight for freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is under attack globally right now, especially in Latin America, but also even in Australia, Canada. Freedom of speech is truly under attack in a way that I think most people don't appreciate. And I want to say thank you to Elon he's really at the tip of the spear of fighting that battle, and I think we should support him in those wars. So anyways, thank you for having me. Lucky to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Shaun. That was an absolutely superb lecture. I'll kick things off with a couple of questions, then we'll open things out to the floor. So the picture you painted of sort of hybrid and information warfare is quite grim. What kinds of companies are you starting to see that are innovating and coming through to defend against that and to start pushing it back?
I think the company doing by far the most right now is X, and I'm biased. We're investors in the company, and they're not perfect. There's still a huge amount of work to do, but Elon and Linda and the team have been taking unbelievable personal risk to do things like, let politicians in Brazil speak that are not supposed to talk, and not letting governments sanction certain topics. And I think that's the most important thing, is just protecting free speech. On the technology side, the only thing that I think is important, or that I'm really seeing right now, is there are some companies that are very good at deep fake detection, whether it's voice or imagery. One of the companies is called Reality Defender. The founder there was an early supporter of my cybersecurity company, so I'm happy to give him a call out. And I think that technology is actually pretty good, but it's going to be an arms race.
Right. And I know you've been very critical of Google in particular. I think if the New York Post has it right, you describe them as, quote, an absolute trash can dumpster fire, with with established internet companies like that. If the culture goes bad inside, can that be saved? And what sort of things can be encouraged to turn that around?
I think, so that is how I feel about the culture there. And I worked there. That said, they just had a very positive development a few weeks ago where Sundar didn't cave in to a mob of students protesting outside the person running Google Cloud's office. And that's big. You just can't always give in to the mob. And that's something that Google has been doing the last few years. And second is, despite having very low respect for the current culture of Google, I have incredible respect for Sergey and Larry. They're, I think, two of the best founders of all time. They're legends. And I think that they lost control of the ship and the culture, and they were not that involved. I've been told that they're more involved now. And so I think that would be, and that might be part of why Sundar was able to step up. Like, there was a fast feedback loop as things were happening. But I think the best thing that could happen to Google, or the best shot from here, is Sergey and Larry leading from the top down and being more involved.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start taking questions from the audience. We've got a roving mic, so it's just coming on. So we'll start over there at the back and then work down. So gentleman at the back with his hand up.
I'll just speak loudly. This good? Thank you so much.
And I'll repeat the question so that,
Sure.
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts. I was struck by the beginning and the end. You spoke about sort of the good old days at Berkeley where you let people speak and then you retort or rebut.
Yep.
I think back then there was a sort of implied respect for people's opinions and right to speak. And now I feel there's almost an implied disrespect or a lack of respect. I want to know your thoughts on what role de-escalation plays in these kinds of conversations. Who bears that burden? Where does it fit in these conversations? How do we get back to that sort of empathetic conversation that you brought up?
Yeah. The question was, at Berkeley, people used to have respectful discourse. How do we get back there? And specifically the role that de-escalation can play in conversation. It's a really good question. Something I didn't really harp on, but when I was at these university encampments, they all have the same rule, at least all the 6 or 7 that I've been to now, which is if you are in the encampment, you are not supposed to talk to anyone that is pro-Israel. Even if they're maximally calm or respectful, you are not supposed to talk to them. You are ordered to not talk to people that are pro-Israel. And that, of all the things that have been happening, that's probably the thing that's made me the most sad, because these are college kids. This is when you're supposed to learn. It's when you're supposed to get exposed to new ideas. And so I would say step 0, irrespective of the de-escalation, you have to be willing to talk to people that have a different point of view than you, and especially if they're coming in a calm way. And so I just, most important thing is we have to get rid of this idea that you won't talk to people because they're on the other side of some issue. That's insane. And then in terms of the de-escalation, it's a good question. I think the root is cancel culture, and I think we just have to move past that on both sides. Jews shouldn't be canceling people with pro-Palestinian views, or only in very, very exceptional circumstances. If it's true hate, or if someone has a plan of how to hurt people or things like that.
Okay, gentleman there. Sorry, yeah.
Maybe give her the microphone just so the recording.
Is it on? Yeah. No? Okay. Thanks for coming in and sharing your thoughts. It's really interesting. You commented on traditional media a few times and also social media. So I have the feeling that nowadays there's always or sometimes even the idea that traditional media has a more and more small role to play. What do you think is the role of traditional media in these information warfares, and what's the relationship to social?
Yeah, Traditional media was essential, and I mean, obviously it was primary form of media for many decades. But you can think about systems like there's top-down systems, bottoms-up. China's a top-down system. America's a bottoms-up system. In news, social media is bottoms-up. Traditional legacy media is top-down. The editorial staff chooses what topics to report on, all that. And there is a lot of value in that top-down viewpoint. And in particular, so take Israel-Palestine. I get canceled whenever I point out statistics. Like, I'm not supposed to say the word Islam, but there are 100 times as many Muslims as there are Jews. And so on social media, Jews are always going to lose the social media battle because you're outnumbered 100 to 1, and social media algorithms are really based on just like volume of responses. There's no editorial, or there's minimal kind of editorial content. Legacy media in the past is very good in those situations of like, if you have one side, it's the unpopular view, but it's correct, then legacy media can help to establish that. The challenge is legacy media lost its will to do that roughly a decade ago. I mean, it started in the 90s, but it has just fully lost the will to go on the side of truth or morality. And so I don't think legacy media is going to get it back, or not the incumbents, but there are some of these next generation legacy media platforms like the Free Press, which Barry Weiss created, and Tablet Magazine, and some of these that are more niche but growing and really trying to stick to those high quality editorial roots. But I think the old world media they lost their credibility, and it's going to be hard for them to recover it.
Do you think it's only in the US, or would you say the same for European countries?
I would definitely say the same for European countries. I think European media has been completely captive by European governments and will basically just say what is the government party line.
Yeah, okay. Gentleman there from glasses.
Okay, thank you very much. This might come across a little controversial, but great. That's why I thought you'd say that, actually. As a proponent of freedom of speech, how do you feel when the fifth hit on the trash can dumpster site, I think that's how you referred to Google, has on the, when putting in Shaun Maguire Sequoia as a search, comes up as introducing Shaun Maguire, pro-genocide founder and venture capitalist at Sequoia Capital. But he's not parroting IDF propaganda. Shaun uses his platform to post conspiracy theories, incite hate against Palestinians, silence legitimate criticism of Israel, and shout down calls for a ceasefire. He's not ignorant of the tone or impact of his language, as he's deleted a number of posts over the past several weeks. You have regularly amplified statements that point to your complete disregard for human rights and international law, and has regularly demonized Palestinians and their supporters.
What was the source?
It's called genocide.vc. It was a website created after October 7th. This is, as I was talking about intimidation tactics, this is basic intimidation tactic to try to get people to stop speaking. It's the same tactics China uses. It's the same tactics Iran uses. And it didn't work on me. Look, I think you all heard today, I'm a very reasonable, moderate person. I had two tweets, or two categories of tweets that really made people lose their minds, and I'm going to call them out right now because I think they're very important. The first one was very beginning of the war. I think it was October 10th. So before anything had even happened, I said, as a reminder, there are almost 2 billion Muslims in the world and less than 20 million Jews. Keep this in mind as the events of the next few months unfold. So I just pointed out population statistics because I know how important that is for social media amplification. So I pointed that out on October 10th. I wanted to say it very early so that it would be in people's minds as they're viewing content. And it's actually surprising me, not necessarily here at Oxford where you're all so smart, but and knowledgeable, but most people don't know that. Truly, like for the last 20 years, I've been trying to talk to people about Israel-Palestine conflict. I'll have a conversation with someone and then I'll ask them, you know, like, how many Jews do you think there are in the world? And they'll say 200 million. I'll say, how many Muslims do you think there are? They'll say 200 million or 20 million, like, 50 million. They almost always would say less. Not necessarily now, but 10, 15 years ago. Almost always, when I would talk to people, they thought that there were, at least in America, they thought that there were more Jews than Muslims, because there were more Jews than Muslims in America, and the Jews had much greater representation in like senior positions and visible positions. But almost nobody that I talked to knew that. And I found that was oftentimes like at the root of people's opinions. And so I wanted to put that out very early, and I got lots of backlash because candidly, when you start attacking the weak underbelly of people's logic or arguments, then they use the equivalent of ad hominems, or they try to intimidate you with other ways. So that was one that has created a lot of backlash. And the second is there's a gentleman named Paul Graham who started something called Y Combinator, who has basically been putting out misinformation since October 7th and blocking every Jew that responds to him, literally blocking every Jew that responds to him. And he had basically put out statistics. What are you trying to show back there?
You asked me what the source was.
Yeah, it's a website called genocide.vc. So basically, Paul had been putting out lots of misinformation, and he posted something about how all the innocent children that Israel was killing, and I reposted it, and I said, for context, these statistics include child soldiers, and Hamas's official recruitment age starts at 15. Their official recruitment age starts at 15. But beyond their official recruitment age, they have been known to use suicide bombing children as young as 11. That's in UN documents, like many examples. There's dozens of examples of documented children between 11 and 15 that were suicide bombers, let alone 15 to 18. And so I said, just keep in mind that these statistics don't include, that they're counting child soldiers. And basically, people lost their mind there because it seemed like I have no empathy for children. And the separation is, I'm just saying that, if someone is a child soldier, if they're a militant, it's very different if they get killed than if they're an innocent child. And when an innocent child gets killed, it's a tragedy. When a child soldier gets killed, I don't view it as a tragedy. It's a tragedy that they got brainwashed and they're in that position. But if they're walking to the front lines to go kill a Jew, shooting them is not a tragedy. Shooting them is survival. And so anyways, that's the type of nuance I was trying to provide. And then they created this website to try to intimidate me and others to be silent. So that's the context. And I just want to say it actually emboldened me to be even louder. Same with the Said School of Business trying to cancel my talk.
First of all, I mainly came here because you were cancelled, so these things can backfire. It's also the case that was one of the most refreshing speeches I've heard in a long time, and I have to listen to a lot of them. I think that I wanted to query you on a couple of things. First of all, I consider free speech to be a civilizational value, never mind democratic. And I get very anxious about any attempts at banning things. And that includes TikTok or anything else. I also I run the Academy of Ideas, but I'm also a legislator in Parliament. And, when they were bringing in the online safety bill in the UK, which is completely draconian and censorious, they would say deep fake, misinformation, TikTok, and all things I worry about, but they use that very much to introduce a regime of control of information. So I think we need to be harder on that, and that's one thing. The second thing is, when you were talking about the encampments and being encouraged, the people being told, don't talk to a Zionist, it's got that whole feel of, or they'll contaminate you, it's a little bit like the cultural boycotts. It's like, have nothing to do with those dirty Jews. I mean, that's almost what's implied in it. But actually, the irony is, if you do engage with these students and talk, it's a house of cards because they know very little. So one of the things that I also wanted to ask you was, I don't feel as though all of this is contrived by misinformation or they watch too much on TikTok. There does seem to me to be a much deeper cultural discussion that we've missed. We've lost a lot of these arguments, by the way, but we need to start having them, and then when we do, we can actually win them. So I just don't want to get trapped in thinking it's all that they've been brainwashed. It's a political fight.
Yeah. Those are fantastic questions. So on the first one, quickly on TikTok, I just want to say, as someone that is one of the biggest detractors to the platform and sees it for exactly what it is, which is nation-state psyop trying to pollute people's minds. I see it very clearly, and I have since 2019. I also am concerned about banning it simply because I just don't think we can ban it in a way that's not a slippery slope for, as an attack on free speech. And so that is something that I'm very concerned about. If I knew that there was a silver bullet way to just ban TikTok and it will not go to anything else, then I would do it. But I struggle to see how that would actually happen in legislative practice. So I'm with you on that. On the second point, on the deeper problem, I completely agree. And I think a really good illustration of that, when I first went to the UCLA encampment, it was put up on Thursday, a week or two ago. They had a sign that when you try to enter, it's like a sign of the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it starts in 1948, and basically it says 2 bullets from 1948. It says that 700, their bullet, I think, was 700,000 Palestinians have to leave because of, Israel. And the second was, I can't remember what the second one was, but there was nothing in there about, Arabs starting a war or that Palestinians rejected the UN, two-state partition plan. And it's just like, it's this very one-sided history. And when you teach people only one side of history, then of course they'll get the wrong answers. Like when you try to do mathematical induction, if your base step is wrong, you're gonna get the wrong conclusion. And that's, I think, what's been happening in mass. And a lot of kids these days are just, they don't read books, they don't talk to people on the other side, and they have the wrong axioms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maguire, for a very engaging presentation. My question is really, coming from the conclusion of your talk, is we've reached a stage of uncertainty with the current state of news and affairs. And it's really sort of the public's perception of this uncertainty that a lot of these platforms are really sort of leveraging. Is it a question as well, though, that the public is losing its faculty for critical thinking, and particularly amongst sort of the next generation, where we're seeing on campus a lack of critical thinking? In your sort of mind, what would you think would be the tools that we can use, to aid this in future? Are there any companies in your portfolio that you're thinking about, sort of in this respect? And yeah, do you think that, say, like philosophy should be mandatory for all sort of undergrads? So what are your thoughts? Thank you.
I really do think that this current generation of college students is, at least in America, not as sharp at critical thinking as past generations. I think some of it is just basic, and the UK is very different than America. This is a lot of graduate students right now, but in America, there's this weird thing that during COVID, we stopped mandating SATs as a requirement for universities. I think that's a massive disaster, and a lot of these elite universities are now starting to mandate it again. But you can let in people that are just not very smart. They don't have the raw horsepower to logic their way through things. You also teach kids that, when you're taking the SAT, there's an objective truth. You know, like you get a score on it, and that's something. When kids have never gotten a real score on anything, everything is pass-fail their whole life, you can think you're the smartest person of all time. You never kind of really actually had to measure yourself. Next thing is I do think that these kids growing up with a gluttony of social media and technology, it's made it really easy to be ADD and ADHD, and just like it's hard to go read a book for 5 hours and just get lost in that when your phone is constantly vibrating and you have, you know, like getting likes on Instagram. And so I think that this generation didn't get that same long form content, which I think is important for developing your brain in a different way. I also think that society had just gotten to a point where we, after the culture war had gotten so extreme that people decided to just shut down. And I think a good example of that, there's this guy, Yuri Berliner, who used to write for NPR, National Public Radio in America, who just wrote this amazing story about 3 weeks ago where just excoriating NPR, a place he worked for 25 years and was an editor, and basically saying that until Trump, everything was fine, but after Trump, NPR and a lot of left media started to believe that ends justify the means, that Trump is so bad that it's okay to fib a little, or it's okay to, you know, ignore details to keep him out of office. And I think that that percolated just into so many different aspects of society. And I think the kids that are in college right now, like they grew up in this era of all these different things. And so I do think that they lack critical thinking, but I'm optimistic that the generation behind them is going to see what a failure this current generation is. And I'm saying that to be provocative. There will be so many rising stars out of this generation. There will be people that, you know, diamonds are formed out of pressure or hard times, whatever. Like there will be, I think we're going to have some of the greatest minds of the next century. I think will actually be the contrarians in this mind that are watching their peers be like vampires or zombies, and it will give them such an interesting perspective.
Gentleman in the first row.
Shaun, you've explained very eloquently how the information we consume is being influenced by well-resourced state actors. And as an individual navigating the information space, that's a real mismatch if I've got state institutions influencing what I'm consuming. How is the West, or how should the West, how are we leveraging our own institutions? You mentioned open source intelligence, to fight back against that, push back against that, so the average person can consume truthful, relevant information?
Look, point one is I want the people, all of you here and anyone that watches on X later, even just knowing these anecdotes and knowing that nation states are this sophisticated and that they're deliberately trying to manipulate all of us, just knowing that and having some of these toy examples, I think can help insulate your mind from the manipulation. So that's point one, and I think that we have to, like, you have to just know the problem and the game that's being played. So that's point one. Point two is I do not think that Western intelligence agencies are playing this game very well right now at all. I think that they got incredibly lazy and arrogant and thought that they're better than the other side and that they've been doing these tactics in a superior way for decades and that the other side will never catch up. And I think they got caught, you know, with their metaphorical pants down, and they need to wake the hell up. Like it's embarrassing. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, Shaun, you've been talking a lot about state actors' involvement in information warfare, and very much as if it's foreign states only. but I think you did touch on, for example, the Twitter files. The Twitter files is all about the American state trying to mislead the American public, and we have the same thing over here. Surely that's just as much of a concern. So the Chinese try to manipulate us, and our state also try to manipulate our information.
Completely agree. It's a huge problem. I'd
rather have the Chinese doing it, really. I don't expect any better from them.
I agree. Look, I think that the West's reaction to the Twitter files has not been strong enough. People need to be demanding answers for, deliberate manipulation of Americans. So, for example, in the Twitter files, or not Twitter files, but with Hunter Biden laptop, the FBI had the laptop for a year before they started banning, saying that it was fake plant from the Russians and, banning talking about it or telling Facebook and Twitter to censor talking about it. And when you have the actual physical laptop for a year, it's like not that hard to do the forensics on it. That was deliberate intervention. Like, people need to be fired for that. And I say this as someone that I love America and I believe in America. I deployed to Afghanistan supporting America. Both of my grandfathers served in the US military. Like, one of my grandfather's brothers died in World War II. Like, I love America. I want to help solve these problems, but we would be delusional to think that America hasn't been a huge part of the problem.
So yeah, my question is quite social/political, but I just have a concern as a rising generation. I think we are kind of, do you think that we have freedom of speech or democracy in the time of the digital media? Because I personally think that we don't now at the moment, especially with the, let's say, privatization of the ownership of Twitter, because it doesn't make sense to say like there's one person or one board or a group of people can be the guardians of the freedom of speech. And if we can say like TikTok is political, let's say like even the truth, for example, it's also like, it's a business, like it's also meant to have some other purposes. So do you think that we have any sort of freedom of speech anymore? Because if you say or discuss or you express your opinion on any platform, the algorithm actually it's gonna capture and either like pass it or censor before it even goes and let the people decide whether it's acceptable, whether it's, let's say, hate speech or it's something positive or negative, because you don't have this right now to let your opinion to reach for other audience. So I know like you're still kind of biased because you are still like, you are representing Sequoia, which is a shareholder of X now, but do you still think, just from an abstract perspective, do you think we are going to see some other platforms where people will be able to express their opinions freely? Thank you.
It's a difficult question. First of all, and yes, I'm biased, but if you go look at, and X is not perfect and make all sorts of mistakes, but the level of free speech on X right now is insane relative to what we had before, where like a sitting US president got removed from the platform and topics were fully banned that were significant for, in an election cycle for forming an opinion. And I gotta say, like, as a Jew, it's really hard sometimes. Like today I posted, there's this guy, Jake Shields, and he posted, like a picture of Hitler, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically like glorifying Hitler. Hitler was right, like Hitler knew what was happening all along, something like that. And look, like when you're able to post that on a platform and post like extreme pro-Israel content, I think you have free speech. And anyways, I don't think the other platforms have it to that level yet. And for what it's worth, free speech, there is nuance in the like definitions of it. It's, hate speech is questionable in free speech. But I'm an optimist. I don't know Mark Zuckerberg personally, but I want to think the best of him, and I do think it's hard, like in Prisoner's Dilemma, when one person defects, the optimal strategy for you is to defect too. And I think that basically all these large social platforms that all defected into moving away from free speech, like cooperating with the government. And then we had this crazy guy, Elon, take over X, and now he's moved back, like he's, the one guy that's in the other quadrant right now. But it means that if other people jump into this quadrant, they'll get a greater payout or whatever. And it's just easy. When one guy's already doing it, it's much easier now for someone like Mark Zuckerberg to just say no to the FBI when they're trying to censor topics. And I think that they're moving in that direction. That's my sense and my hope.
If I can just have a chance to have a follow-up question. So you can just say Twitter or X is the best we are having now. Is it the best?
I think that X has the most free speech of any social platform in the world right now. Do you disagree with that?
Definitely, yes.
You disagree?
Yeah, I disagree, yes. Because just from the perspective of you can't put someone as the guardian of the free speech, no matter what. I mean,
yeah.
And we all know that one of the biggest drivers for Elon's decision to acquire Twitter was, he was saying like he was disagreeing with the algorithm. And definitely, like, we are human beings. I mean, we're always biased to our opinion, at least. And I definitely disagree with that. And I feel from the point that Twitter became X, which is now it's a private company, it can never be presented as, and I feel like Twitter, because it was a public company, as a user, even if just have an account, I have access to much more information, but now I can't because it's protected now. So, I mean, regardless of, we cannot just compare way down and say like this is more, this presents or give us more free speech, but I can't say like this is a private platform that can give us more free speech. It doesn't make sense to me. I just don't want to take much time.
Thank you.
Shaun, the very consistent narrative that we got over lockdowns, on balance, do you think that was generated from the bottom up, or was that a top down? So bottom up in the sense that it was government sort of reacting to a sort of a herd hysteria, to a perceived threat, or was it more of a top down push, do you think?
Oh, I think there was an extreme amount of manipulation on all levels. Something that, I mean, I'm gonna tell you something that's not a conspiracy theory, and then I'm gonna tell you something that, to me, like it may come across as a conspiracy theory, but it's my own opinion as someone that was following COVID very, very closely. I was following COVID very closely from like January 1st, 2020, and it didn't really become a big thing in America until like end of February. But basically, the thing that's not a conspiracy theory is almost certainly is a lab leak from China. And since April 2020, there was almost bulletproof evidence of that, even though you weren't allowed to talk about it, like bulletproof evidence. But something that is a little bit of a conspiracy theory, I was watching the imagery out of China. I've been a very close China observer, obviously, from this talk, you pick up on that, for decades. And the imagery coming out of China did not make sense to me, given what the virus actually was. For example, in like January or February, there was imagery of China of burning kind of mass body bags, like hundreds of body bags on the ground and burning them all. There was imagery of barricading people in their apartments, like literally, putting wood planks in their apartments and like the police locking them in there. Knowing how China operates, I think that what happened is the thing leaked inside China. They knew that it was going to have a big economic impact for them. So they said, if we're going to have an economic impact, we want everyone to have an economic impact, and we want it to be even worse for them. And so you want other people to overreact. And so in January and February, before it really got to America and Europe, they were deliberately putting out max hysterical content to make people be really, really, really afraid. And that fear fed into both top-down government policy, but also fed into bottoms-up reaction, myself included. Like, I fell for that to some extent. And so like when it got to America, I was really, really scared about the severity of it. And I think that if it would have started in America, it wouldn't have been nearly as extreme of a reaction, because we would have had the data early on around the actual like R squared and severity, and it was really bad. Don't get me wrong, like COVID was very, very bad, but the imagery of burning mass body bags and barricading people in apartments, like I think that was deliberate.
Thank you. I am an MBA student from Saïd Business School that canceled their event, and actually half of the people here are from Saïd Business School. So we really defend your right to speak. And I'm also from China.
Yeah.
I'm sitting through this.
I picked up on that. I saw you nodding both directions a couple times.
Some I was not nodding, but
I got it.
Anyway, you said if you assume that everybody think that you're a reasonable, moderate person from today's talk. It's up to us to judge.
Great.
But I feel some of the words, maybe you obviously have strong opinions on a lot of sensitive topics. You maybe deliberately pick up some topics over other ones. You admit it yourself that you're biased, maybe. And I just, this is a personal question. I don't know, is it, and then your representation in Twitter, some of the speeches really also exaggerated in words. Is it your personality always, or it's because you were canceled or you silenced your voice? So this is the only way that you think now is the best way to fight and for freedom of speech. And to us, we're also defending your rights for freedom of speech, and we have our own opinions too. What can we do? Do we need to be loud, to the world? Exaggerate and be strong opinion holders as well? What is the best way to do this?
Look, I appreciate you being here. I very much welcome debate. We could spend the next 10 minutes just debating one-on-one if you'd like. I mean, is there a specific topic where you think I'm either particularly exaggerated or particularly wrong? Is there anything that you think was factually wrong in my topic, in my talk?
Look, it's a lot of information bomb you dropped on me about China, which I don't know before. I also personally lived in China, Russia, and US, and now UK. Actually, I don't have a lot of strong opinions on certain things. I was very skeptical about a lot of things happening in different countries. I just feel the way that you communicate things are black and white in a lot of sense. So it's also, I also question, how do I represent some of the topics or my opinions? And I'm just...
Is there a particular opinion that you disagreed with the most?
Not disagree, but I question if it's true, right? Because it's a lot of anecdotes.
What's an example?
A lot of things happen in China, all these anecdotes. I don't know, right? There's no fact that's backed it up.
Go look up everything I said today.
In where?
Every single thing I said is pretty easily Googleable, except for my train story, but you can look at the dates. And I have some Facebook photos and stuff of being on those trains. I think you can verify everything I said related to China.
Yeah, I just want to ask my question, but thank you for the answer.
I mean, you weren't asking a question. You were trying to protest, which I understand, but that wasn't a question. You hid a question at the end, but it wasn't really a question. It was a comment.
My question is it the best way to have the freedom of speech in this way? Have your voice heard, come into all these schools, present strong opinions about sensitive topics based on anecdotes?
Well, as I said at the beginning of this is the first time I've ever done something like this. So it's not schools, it's single school. And it was supposed to be just a smaller conversation, primarily with Jewish students, to talk about what's happening, and that it's a very traumatic time for Jews, and helping to just talk through the issues as someone that follows them closely. But I got canceled by the Saïd School of Business, which is named after a Syrian arms dealer who literally deals arms to the Palestinians. And so I got canceled, and so I decided to come and give a full talk.
Yeah, I'll leave the question to other people too.
Thank you. Final question, George.
So, Shaun, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for being so frank and open. And I hope that you do this more often in other places, because I think it's incredibly valuable to hear your views. You're clearly very well informed in lots of different ways. And it's important because I come across so many people now who just parrot what they've heard on CNN or read somewhere. It's really disturbing. It's not just the younger generation, it's older people as well. But I wanted to ask you a specific question, which is what if anything governments should be doing that they're not doing? If you had the legislative pen, is there anything in particular you do? And I say that knowing that most governments get it wrong. They over-legislate. There are some governments that sort of actively participate in all this. There are other, and I'm sure all governments are involved in a clandestine way, as you've already alluded to. But legislation always has unintended consequences, doesn't it? But then on the other hand, young people are growing up from a very early age being influenced by things which are clearly wrong. Is it up to the private sector to sort this out, or is there a role for government?
I think that I personally think there's not that much role to play on the legislative side. I think that we already have just so many laws, so many topics related to information warfare. I think where the opportunity is on the enforcement of things, the enforcement of laws and leadership, and moral clarity from leadership. So I think it's less about like passing new laws and more about shrewd enforcement of the laws we already have. And I just want to say to the lady I was just talking to, like, genuinely, I say this like from one human to another. Like, I wish you the best. I hope we can become friends someday. Yeah.
I thought we were already friends.
We're friends.
And with that, which is a nice way to end it, thank you all so much for coming, and please join me one last time in